In this episode, we take a look at the D-FUSE Trapezoid softbox. Before talking about the softbox, first we need to talk about what soft light is. I think a lot of people get confused when they initially start doing photography or videography or filmmaking, and they assume that softness has to do with the brightness of the light. This is not the same thing. Softness in this case refers from the transition to lit to shadow, and it also has a little bit to do with contrast. So what is soft light? Soft light generally will have a smoother transition from the light to shadows. So you can see it here on my face. This is a moderately, somewhere between soft and hard. It also has to do with contrast. So when you have less contrast between the light and shadows within your frame, then that's usually softer as well. So you'll generally get more details in the shadow when you're using softer light. Next question, how do you make the light softer? Well, that has to do with the size of the light relative to your subject. So the larger the light source relative to your subject, the softer the light is. Now that can be done in a few different ways. You can put a diffusion in front of your light and make it larger with a larger panel of diffusion, or you can move the light closer. Those all actually result in softer light. Now that seems counterintuitive at first because you're thinking, again, you get confused with this concept of brightness or intensity versus softness, and it's not the same thing. And so as you move a light in closer and the relative size of the light perceptually becomes larger to the subject, then you actually get softer light. And that's exactly what the D-FUSE Trapezoid does, is it makes your 1x1 LED panel larger, and it also diffuses it some as well. Now, the white diffusion material that they use is actually fairly thin, and what's important about it is we actually measured it with our Seikonic C800 spectrometer, and we found that it does not influence the color temperature or the green-magenta balance in any sort of substantial way. So, for example, we saw a small difference in the overall color temperature in Kelvin of 40 degrees, which is pretty much insubstantial. And then we also saw no effect in terms of making the light go more green or more magenta, so that's perfect. What's more about this is that it creates circular catch lights in the eyes or circular specular highlights on your product. So that is a generally desired trait as well. A lot of times when you have a circular light source, it kind of fits a little bit better with eyes. A lot of people like it, so it's a desired effect in many cases. It's up to you as to whether or not you like it. Here are a couple of shots, one with a D-FUSE Trapezoid and one without, using my 1x1 LED panel from Lupo. And what you can see here is the difference is actually fairly subtle. But the big thing you will notice is that the shadow from my nose is ever so slightly softer. That is to say, it takes a little bit more time to transition from light to dark. That wasn't a huge difference with this, but where you're seeing the bigger difference is that there's less contrast between the highlights and shadows here. You can see there's a little bit more detail in the shadows. You can see the side of my face that is not directly lit a little bit more. You can see my ear there as opposed to it just falling off into complete darkness. Now, how much light does this cut? When you add this to your light, it's going to cut it some, and we found that we had to increase the light output by about 15% to keep the same exposure. So it doesn't cut a ton of light, which is also really handy. Now, of course, you can also use this for product shots, and speaking of product shots, Tax makes well-crafted mechanical timepieces and recently announced their automatic vintage lens 2 dark metal edition. This watch is constructed with solid 316L stainless steel with sapphire crystal face and back, so you can appreciate the elegance of the 21-jewel Citizen Miyota 8250 movement. I've had a chance to wear this piece over the last several weeks and can say that it certainly garners attention and conversation from its striking photography-inspired design. The AVL2 automatically winds itself throughout the day as you move your wrist. No batteries to change, ever. Tax has kindly offered 30% off to viewers of Learn Light and Sound using discount code CurtisVIP at checkout through December 30th. See the AVL2 Dark Metal Edition and more at tax-image.com. Setup is very simple. It's very much like those 5-in-1 reflectors where it pops open. You have this kind of wire-rimmed frame, and then you have 4 different supports that actually hold the diffusion front away from the back of the softbox, and they're held in place by these magnets, and then you slide this sleeve over them so that they lock. It's a really pretty clever design that works very nicely. Once you have the softbox set up, Then you have these 4 elastic Velcro straps that you can use to attach the softbox to your light. This is nice because you get some freedom in terms of how to attach it, and you can use whatever technique makes sense for your particular light. Fold up is basically the opposite of setup. And the nice thing is that it folds down very, very small, and of course it is very light. You don't need a separate light stand to make this work like you would if you were using a typical diffusion panel that you would attach to a C-stand or something of that nature. So this can keep your kit very nice and small. I find it very useful, again, for corporate shoots where I have to schlep everything around. This makes it a little bit easier to get that soft look without having to haul around an entire huge softbox or a diffusion panel and another C-stand. No product is perfect. What are the cons? Well, first of all, it only comes in a 1 foot by 1 foot size, so a 12-inch by 12-inch, which is a pretty standard size for LED panels, but not all of them are that size. Now, if yours is bigger than that, you can probably still make this work. And if you're using one that's smaller than this, just a little bit smaller, you could probably make it work, but if it's really tiny, it's not going to be as easy to attach it to the light. Secondly, the diffusion material on the front is very, very translucent, so it doesn't give you super soft light. It softens it some. It definitely changes the contrast ratio of your overall image, which is good, but it's not going to give you that super, super, super soft light that wraps really, really well around noses and things of that nature. So just to set your expectations there. For me, I think it leaves enough contrast to make the shots interesting, and it comes at a very, very convenient price in terms of both how much it costs and in terms of how much you have to invest to carry it around, because that's not very much. So there's a look at the Kamerar D-FUSE Trapezoid softbox. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you have not already subscribed, make sure you do that, and we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon. And if you have not already subscribed, make sure you do that, and we'll be sure to go.